Peace be with all of you. A delight to be with you today for these talks on the priesthood. And of course, nothing gives me greater joy than talking about the priesthood. I've been a priest now for almost 35 years, and there have been ups and downs, good times and bad times. But I can say very honestly that it's been a source of enormous joy for me. We've been passing through a tough period. In fact, most of my priesthood, brothers, has been under the shadow of the sex abuse scandal. I wrote a little book on that a couple years ago, Letter to a Suffering Church, where I went into all those details. But, despite all of that, the priesthood to me has been a source of enormous spiritual joy. And so I want to, maybe if some of you are feeling the struggle a bit, going through tough times, I want to renew in you a sense of the power and beauty and joy of the priesthood. And I want to do it maybe in a somewhat surprising way. I want to go back to 4 Old Testament figures, each one of which tells us something important, I think, about the priesthood. I'll be talking to you today about Adam, about Noah, about Jacob, and about Jonah. So I'll divide my talks that way. We'll do Adam and Noah in the first talk, and then Jacob and Jonah in the second talk. Each one is a kind of archetype, I think, of the priesthood. So let's look at Adam first. To get a sense of what Adam means, we have to go back to the very opening verses of the Bible. So in the beginning, when the tohu vabohu, right, the watery chaos obtains, God speaks. And then out of that watery chaos, he brings the order of the cosmos. Let there be light, and there was light. Let the earth come forth, and the earth came forth. Notice something, first of all, brothers. In almost all the other creation myths of the ancient world, creation happens through some primal act of violence. It's one God conquering another or wrestling matter into shape. In the biblical account, we don't have violence. We have a nonviolent act of speech giving rise to the world. But notice something else. Everything mentioned now in these opening verses, so think of the sun and the stars and the mountains and the animals and so on, everything mentioned in one culture or another in the ancient world was worship as a god. As the author of Genesis says, no, created. He's subtly dethroning all these false claimants to divinity. All these creatures have been worshipped, and the author of Genesis is saying, no. But then something more positive. Notice how all the elements of creation come forth in this orderly manner. So God speaks, and it comes forth. And then we hear that, evening came, morning followed the first day. Then the same rhythm, God speaks, and something else comes forth, and evening follows, and then morning, the second day, etc. What you're seeing, if I can put it this way, is a kind of stately liturgical procession. Think of the way a liturgical procession unfolds in this ordered manner. And there's the clue. None of these things is to be worshiped, but all of these things are to be involved in a kind of cosmic liturgy. They find themselves precisely in the act of giving praise and worship to God. Now, who comes last in this great procession after God creates all the elements of the world, including things that creep and crawl upon the earth? Who comes last but the human being? Who comes last in a liturgical procession? The one who is to lead the procession in prayer. So at the end comes the priest or comes the bishop who will now lead everyone else in the great act of praise. Now we get, brothers, on a biblical reading, exactly what our role is as human beings. Our job is to be the great priest of creation. As we, in a conscious, intelligent way, give praise to God, we are, as it were, leading all of creation in a great chorus of praise. What did St. Augustine say? But the fundamental problem is that we exchange a creature for the Creator. We tend to give highest praise to some created thing rather than to the Creator. The author of Genesis is saying very clearly, the rightly ordered world is a function of right praise. Now, think about this. The word orthodoxy, we associate it with right belief, but of course means fundamentally right praise. Doxa, praise, glory. When I give right praise to God, I become rightly ordered in my own life. And when I give right praise to God, order tends to break out around me. You know the great Gloria prayer at Mass, glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace to people of good will. Well, that's a formula, right? If I give glory to God in the highest, then peace will tend to obtain within me and around me. Orthodoxy, right praise, is what it's finally all about. Now, what goes wrong with us? Well, a lot of ways you could read the Genesis account of what goes wrong, what original sin is. Can I suggest the original sin in its primal form is bad praise. So as Adam and Eve grasp at the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what are they doing? They are arrogating to themselves the unique prerogative of God. Right? It's God's prerogative alone to determine the nature of good and evil. But when I seize that for myself, what's happened? I've now made myself, my own will, the criterion of good and evil. I've effectively come to worship myself. The original sin is a suspension of right praise. What does it lead to? It leads to the disintegration of the self. You know, an image I've used a lot in my writing and my speaking is that of the rose window. I studied over in Paris for my doctorate, and I love the Gothic churches. I used to give tours at Notre Dame. I visited Chartres whenever I could. And you know, the great rose windows, these wheels of light and color. At the center of the rose is always a depiction of Christ. He might be very small. You might need binoculars to see him, but it's a little picture of Christ. And then wheeling around it, in all these ordered harmonies, are the different elements of the window, all connected by spokes to the center. That's an image, isn't it? It's not just a pretty picture. It's an image of the properly functioning soul. When the soul is centered on God, and all worship means, it comes from an older English word, worthship. Right? What's of highest worth to you? That's what you worship. See, so everyone worships something. Talk to the most secularized person. He worships something. It might be wealth, it might be power, it might be his own honor, it might be his reputation, it might be his family, it might be his country. I don't know. But he's worshiping, he's giving highest praise to something. The basic idea of the book of Genesis here is when we make that move in regard to something other than God, we tend to disintegrate. We fall apart. And by extension, the world around us tends to fall apart. You know that great image, C.S. Lewis uses it. of the ships all sailing as a convoy, right? They're in a common project. And they're led by an admiral in the flagship, and they're all moving together. Suppose one ship, just one ship, deviates from the command of the admiral. Well, it might not look very serious, but before you know it, that ship's going to bump into another ship, which is now going to deviate from the course and bump into another ship. And before you know it, the whole convoy has descended into chaos. Where's the order come from? It comes from the direction of the admiral. What's worship? It's bringing all the elements of my soul into harmony around one great act of praise. So go back to the rose window for a second. Think of all the elements in the rose window as evocative of dimensions of yourself. It's your mind, it's your will, it's your passions, it's your private life, your public life, your friendships, your recreation that you seek. It's all the different aspects of your life. If you are centered on God, if you worship Him, then your soul is going to fall into these harmonious patterns. Concomitantly, when you worship something other than Christ, your soul will disintegrate. And now, fellow sinners, brothers, we're all to some degree in the same boat, aren't we? All of us sinners know what this feels like. My mind goes this way, but my will goes that way. One set of passions go this way, the other set goes that way. My private life goes this way, my public life goes that way. Does that sound familiar from the recent scandals? I disintegrate when I no longer engage in a great act of right praise. That's the original sin. That's the loss, if you want, of the imago Dei. You see, we're meant to be God's image bearers in the world. That means we're meant to lead all of creation in a great chorus of right praise. Here are a couple interesting clues now as we pursue this line of interpretation. If you look in the account in Genesis of the Garden of Eden, it speaks of these 4 rivers that flow from it. Remember? We're probably going to miss this detail, but if rivers are flowing from it, that means Eden must be itself a kind of mountain. If it's just flat ground, the rivers aren't going to flow out from it. They flow from it because Eden is being pictured as a mountain. Now, in the Jewish sensibility, the minute you say mountain, what are you thinking of above all? But Mount Zion, true pole of the earth. There all the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord. Mount Zion, the place of the temple. The temple was the place par excellence of right praise, where Israel was rightly gathered. Adam is the first priest. He's operating, if you want, in the first temple. As long as he is aligned to God, he's operating according to his proper identity as priest. His sin, which quite rightly is seen as having negative implications for the whole of creation. His sin is falling out of his priestly identity, disintegrating himself and allowing the world to disintegrate around him. You know that beautiful, it's typical of the Bible, that it's told so laconically, with such elegance and economy of expression. When God, calls them out, and what's the first move? Oh, that woman you put here with me, she made me do it. And then the woman, that snake you put here, he made me do it. Well, what's being communicated there is the disintegration of self, of community, and even more, all of creation. So now we have human beings blaming nature. Bad praise, brothers, leads to disintegration inside and outside. I suggest to you one way to read now the whole trajectory of the Bible is God's patient attempt to restore his people to their priestly character. How often Israel is described as a priestly people. Was he placed at the very center of their life, but a series of liturgical laws. And he places eventually the temple, which gathers their right praise. And what's the dream of the prophets and the psalmist? That one day the whole world would be so galvanized by, so intrigued by the right praise of Israel, that they would all be gathered unto the same praise. There all the tribes go up, the tribes of Israel, but by extension, all the tribes of the world. Read Isaiah now under that rubric. Okay, you're saying, well, I guess that's all sort of interesting, biblical theology, but what does that have to do with me? Well, brothers, it's got everything to do with us. What's our identity? We ordained people. We're ordained to the priesthood. What's our basic task? Listen now, is to lead our people in right praise. What's wrong with us today in the world? The same thing that's been wrong with us from the beginning. Sin is always bad praise. I mean, look at the people in your parish. Just start, locally. When they suffer spiritually and psychologically, that's a function of making something less than God into God. I remember when I was doing pastoral work full time, and you talk to people who were very successful in the worldly sense, had everything. And they come to me and say, Father, I just feel lost, Father, my family, my marriage is falling apart. Father, my kids hate me. Father, I've lost a sense of purpose. Yeah, because you've spent your whole life worshiping creatures rather than the Creator. What's at the center of our life as priests? But the liturgy, where we lead our people in right praise. This is not just, a nice little pious thing we do for an hour every Sunday. It's the fulcrum of the world. Thomas Merton put it that way. The great Trappist writer. Merton went to Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky, where he eventually became a monk. He went there for a retreat. And in his diary afterwards, he said, I found the place around which the whole country revolves without knowing it. Beautiful expression of this very point I've been making. What did he find in Gethsemane but the place of the liturgy, a place where these monks had given themselves radically to the praise of God? And yes, indeed, the whole country revolves around that without knowing it. And so when you come out on a Tuesday morning at 6:30 to celebrate Mass, and I remember when I was in the parish, years ago, and I'd get assigned the 6:30 Mass, and back in those days, it was harder for me to wake up at 5:30 in the morning. Now I do it all the time. But I remember getting out of bed with a certain, resentment and why I had to go and say this Mass, and here's these, few people standing around, but when you're doing that, brothers, 6:30 on Tuesday morning, you're saying the simplest Mass, you are indeed engaging in the act by which the whole cosmos is knitted back together. See, that's why our job is so important, it seems to me, in the world. For ourselves, yes. For our people, yes. But for the whole society. I've been writing for years now about the problem of secularism. It's rampant in our society. You know that. The numbers in the Catholic Church are upwards of 40% of young Catholics under 30 now claim no religion. In our country, it's now 26% would claim no religion. Secularism. What's another way to understand secularism is I'm worshiping something other than God. It's not really secular. There's always worship involved. It's just now devolved into worship of sex or pleasure or money or power or country or culture. What we do, yes, even standing at the altar at 6:30 on Tuesday morning, is the great subversive act which knits the cosmos back together. It's a recovery of Mount Zion, true pole of the earth. It's a recovery of the Garden of Eden. So first, brothers, as you think of Adam, think of this deeply priestly identity that is ours, this liturgical identity, and savor the enormous importance of that. Okay, second figure I want to talk about, also from the opening chapters of Genesis, is the great figure of Noah. Undoubtedly the most famous sailor in the Bible. Maybe Jonah would be second to him. Notice something, please. When God made the universe, he brings order out of the tohu vabohu. That's that famous Hebrew phrase, hard to translate. But it seems to mean something like watery chaos. Notice how the watery chaos asserts itself throughout the biblical narrative. Think of the Red Sea through which the Israelites have to travel. Think of Jesus walking on the stormy waters of the Sea of Galilee. And maybe most famously here in the story of Noah. In the chapters following the description of the fall, right, in chapter 3 of Genesis, you have again very elegantly told in richly symbolic language all the permutations and combinations of bad praise. Because of bad praise, all sorts of bad things happen. The floodwaters in the Noah story are evocative of the return of the tohu vabohu. When there is wickedness, we hear, upon the whole face of the earth. What's another way to understand wickedness? Bad praise, suspension of orthodoxy. And with that comes the tohu vabohu. Sin, brothers, undoes God's creative work. And anyone involved in pastoral ministry knows that. What's the supreme expression of God's creative work but the human being made in God's image and likeness? Don't we see it in ourselves and the people we serve, how sin undoes it? Sin causes disintegration, the falling apart of the self. That's what this story is about. And more precisely, I think, it's about what do we do when the tohu vabohu comes storming into our lives. So we know what it's supposed to be, right praise, but we're all sinners. We're surrounded by a sinful world. So what do you do when the tohu vabohu comes back? That's what the story of Noah and the ark is about. God finds, amidst all this chaos, this one man. Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. Noah walked with God. Now, that's a beautiful little image I want you to stay with. So we heard in the earlier story that Adam, in the cool of the evening, was wont to walk with God. It's beautiful. When you walk with someone, right, you can't be sprinting ahead, you can't be lagging behind. When you walk with someone, you sort of fall into rhythm with them. There's a kind of, subtle choreography involved, really, in the art of walking with someone. You enter into their rhythm. You move with them. Therefore, it's a beautiful symbol of the rightly ordered self. The self that worships God above all things, walks in easy harmony with God. What's sin? Well, walking to my own choreography. I follow the beat of a different drum, my own drum. I walk the way I want to walk. I get ahead of God or behind God, away from God. In the midst of the chaos, the Lord found one man, Noah, who is able still to walk with God. So I'll refine the question. What enables you to walk with God even during times of the tohu vabohu, when the flood waters come back? Now again, in this virtual way, of course, I can't see you. I'm sure there's some listening to me who've, like me, been priests for a long time. Maybe some just getting started, some 10 years, 20 years, whatever. You know what this is about, don't you? Those times when the watery chaos comes back. The times when we feel lost. We feel more alienated from God than connected to God. Maybe our aspirations and dreams didn't quite come true. Maybe we're under the pressure of our pastoral ministry, whatever it is. Maybe our own sinfulness is undermining us. The tohu vabohu comes back. This story is about what do you do so that you can, listen, walk with God even during those times. Well, God says to Noah, make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. A boat. What's a boat? It's the vehicle that can maintain itself even on the stormy waters. One way, brothers, to read the whole Bible is God's stubborn attempt to send a rescue operation. Through our own sin, the abuse of our own freedom, we've caused this disintegration in ourselves and in the wider world. But God, on the Bible's reading, relentlessly sends rescue operations. Here's the first, Noah's Ark. Make it of cypress wood, make it firm and strong, make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. The idea is to make it watertight, make it ship shape. What's the spiritual space, brothers, that we have to create in order to survive during the times of the stormy waters? During the times of spiritual chaos, how do we survive? And then this, of course, making the story especially famous. You shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. So we saw Adam's job is to lead all of creation in a great chorus of praise. Of course we're linked to creation. The Bible never tells the story of a sort of individualistic, humanistic account of salvation. No. Salvation's a cosmic event. We're the leaders of the chorus of praise, but it involves all of creation. And therefore, sin does damage to creation too. So how beautiful that on this ark, on the deck of which Noah is still able to walk with God, he also maintains a connection with all of creation. Can I suggest something? The ark is a kind of floating temple. So we saw Eden itself as a temple. The temple is built eventually on Mount Zion, true pole of the earth. Christ will refer to himself as a temple. You've got a greater than the temple here because he becomes the place of right praise. Well, here is a sort of floating temple, enabling us to give right praise to God in union with creation, even during the stormy times. It's the place, if you want, where a microcosm of God's good order is preserved. Okay, with all that in mind, now reread the church fathers as they interpreted this story. How did they interpret the Ark of Noah? But a great foreshadowing of the church. When I was a student, I mentioned in Paris many years ago, and I used to give tours at Notre Dame, but I used to love to go and sit by the River Seine behind Notre Dame Cathedral, looking back up at it. And from that point of vantage, it looked for all the world like a great ship, because there it was on the Ile de la Cité, right in the middle of the Seine. The flying buttresses coming out the side were a bit like oars. Of course, this is not accidental. The architects wanted to build the church in such a way that it would suggest its nature as a ship. In fact, the central aisle of the cathedral, as of all great churches, is called the nave, N-A-V-E, navis, ship. What's the idea? We live in a stormy world, a place where the tohu vabohu tends to reign. What we need is a place, listen, where a microcosm of God's good order is preserved, and where we can continue, even in the stormy seas, to walk confidently with God on the deck of the ship. So, brothers, think about the church where you serve. Now, maybe it's not Notre Dame Cathedral, but think of the church where you serve. What goes on there? People gather in this place. They look up at depictions of the saints and of the angels, perhaps. Certainly in the Gothic churches, there were depictions of plants and trees and animals, all of the cosmos there. In that place, people come together and sing. Now, as I tape this during COVID, we can't sing in church, but that day will come again. The singing is not just, for entertainment. It's not just decorative. No, singing is expressing something very profound, that all these disparate voices come together in this one place and harmonize as they give shared praise to God. In that place, they listen to God's holy word. In that place, Christ becomes really present and is offered again to the Father in sacrifice. In other words, that church, however humble it might be, is the Noah's Ark where you and your people are able to walk confidently, where a microcosm of the rightly ordered world is on display. How crucially important this is, brothers. You're Adam. You lead the people in right praise. You're also Noah. You are captain of this great ship. Now, think of it, too, in terms of your own personal spiritual life. Again, we all know about the stormy waters. Are we careful to build an ark for ourselves? Notice that when Noah gets the command to build the ark, well, we presume it's in some desert place. The biblical authors are desert people. And he's told to build this giant ship. And the Bible doesn't go into this, but it's easy enough to imagine. What were people thinking as he's constructing this massive ship with no water anywhere in sight? Well, he's out of his mind. How often we seem that way, we who pursue the spiritual life with seriousness, to people around us. Thinking, especially in our secularized time, who are these people? Who's this nut building a boat in the middle of a desert? But we know, don't we, the deeper truth of things. What's the Noah's Ark look like for us? Every morning now, I mentioned when I was younger, I had a hard time waking up at 5:30, but now I wake up typically around 5 or so. And it's a great privilege I have as a bishop. I have a little chapel in my house with the Blessed Sacrament. And invariably, every morning, and it's not a burden to me, it's a great joy. I get a cup of coffee and I go into that chapel and I do the Holy Hour. And, Fulton Sheen was a big influence on me there. He concluded every single retreat he ever gave to priests with the recommendation of doing a sustained hour of prayer every day in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. And Sheen used to say, on the weekends, yeah, on your vacation, every day. And I found, brothers, it's just an enormous source of strength and focus. The rosary, when I was a young guy, some of you, I'm sure, remember this, that it wasn't really encouraged. It was, in fact, kind of frowned upon. That's the way, your grandmother prays. The rosary, many years ago now, became a very important part of my spiritual life. The Jesus prayer, from the Eastern traditions, I'm very fond of that. I have that little rope, the prayer rope with the little knots on it, and I pray the Jesus prayer regularly. Meditation, spiritual reading. I've always got a spiritual book in my chapel. I'm not reading it the way I read academic books or books for entertainment. It's a spiritual reading. What is all that? Well, the Bible talks about all the food that Noah brought onto the ark so that during the stormy times, he and his family would have something to eat. It might be the best time in your life and everything's going swimmingly and everything's fine. But in season out, you return to these great practices of prayer. Why? Because you know the tohu vabohu is coming. You know it will return. And so what are you doing even now during that dry season to construct the ark and to fill it with the food that you will need? I remember when I was teaching in the seminary for many years. I was rector of the seminary in Chicago. It's hard, brothers, sometimes to communicate to our young brothers in the seminary and young in the priesthood, to communicate these truths as they're living their lives and everything's going well and they're healthy and they're happy. And one reason you pray, the rosary, one reason you spend time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, one reason you attend a daily Mass, etc., is so that you got food when you need it. You're building the ark, even when people around you are questioning your sanity. So the floodwaters come, as they always do, but Noah and his family and that remnant of God's good order survives. I love the details, though, as the rains stop and the waters begin to recede. Noah is eager, so he sends out the birds, first the raven and the dove, looking for dry land. And the minute he finds it, the minute he knows it's safe, what does he do? He opens all the doors and all the windows of the ark to let out the life. The church is indeed a Noah's Ark. Yes, it can be indeed the place where we hunker down during difficult times. It's where that remnant of God's good order is preserved. But finally, we know its purpose is not to keep us hunkered down. Rather, it's now to let out the life that's been so carefully preserved. At the end of Mass, of course, the priest or the deacon will say, go. The Mass is ended. Go. Glorify the Lord with your life. Go proclaim the good news. In other words, take what you've received here, but don't cultivate it simply for yourself. Let it go. Let it go. Now, for the sake of the transformation of the world. Well, brothers, we're Adam. We're also Noah. We're captains of this ship. And I know it can be discouraging, especially in our very secularist time. I know people can laugh at us. I have a ministry on the internet, and I put videos out and write articles and so on, and people can comment. Well, there are a lot of secular people who just think we religious types are a little bit crazy, and trust me, they're not hesitant to tell you that. Okay, I'm sure they laughed at Noah as he was building the ark. But we are, in fact, yes, and that's again 6:30 Mass on Tuesday morning. We are, in fact, yes, as we sit patiently in front of the Blessed Sacrament, Yes, as we do our spiritual reading. Yes, as we pray the rosary. Yes, as we spend time with the Lord every day. We are in that process preserving something which the world still desperately needs. So be an Adam. Be a Noah. Be a captain of that ship that endures even the stormiest waters, because it's good not just for you, it's good for the whole world. And God bless you.